basis for Christian mysticism emerges naturally, even inevitably, within the Gospels themselves, because they lay the foundation on which Jesus Christ is revealed as the embodiment of divine-human union. Emmanuel, God with us, becomes a cornerstone for the development of a Christian theology of union with the divine. The New Testament witness of Jesus Christ introduced rich theological tensions that later Christian tradition would seek to resolve. If God is one, how can Jesus and Spirit be divine? What does it mean to say that Christ is truly human and truly divine? How can titles and attributes that belong only to God now be used of Jesus and the Spirit, such as Creator, Redeemer, and Lord? The early church addressed these tensions through the development of Christian doctrine. The uniquely Christian experience of God, now as Father, now as Son, now as Spirit, culminated after nearly 4 centuries in the development of the doctrine of the Trinity. This came to authoritative expression in the Nicene Creed, which should be understood not as a description of God, which would be idolatry, but as a Christian way of modeling our experience of God, who transcends description of any kind. It is mystical truth expressed in precise theological language. That brings us to our meditation. So our second reading spans pages 19 and 20. Thus, to speak of God as Trinity, 3 and 1, is something akin to what Dennis Turner would call self-subverting language. That is, the use of language to establish a logical contradiction. God cannot logically be both 3 and 1 in a numerical sense. The attributions are mutually exclusive, forcing us to recognize the profound failure of human language to grasp the divine. Thus, the doctrine of the Trinity is at once an attempt to model the uniquely Christian experience of God as essentially relational, even as it forces us to recognize that no language is adequate of God. As the great 6th century architect of Western Christian mysticism, Pseudo-Dionysius, observed, we should not think some ways of speaking about God are more right than others. Better to say that some ways of speaking about God are less wrong than others, and doctrine is no exception. So for those who cannot join us through the conversation, we come to our closing prayer. God to enfold me, God to surround me, God in my speaking, God in my thinking, God in my sleeping, God in my waking, God in my watching, God in my hoping. God in my life, God in my lips, God in my soul, God in my heart. God in my sufficing, God in my slumber, God in mine ever-living soul, God in mine eternity. That's taken from the Carmina Gadelica. Okay. So as always, I open it conversation to the floor. If there's any thoughts, or questions, or reflections that you might want to raise to get us started today. Joanne?
Are you saying Joan? Me?
Yeah, I'm sorry, Joan.
Okay. The reason that I know that I don't understand the Trinity is because it seems simple to me and not to anyone else. So therefore, I think you must have it wrong, Joan. I don't see anything impossible to understand about water is H2O, but sometimes it's liquid, sometimes it's all liquid, it's gas, it's a vapor or fog, whatever. Is that, what am I getting wrong about that as an example of the Trinity? It must be wrong.
No, you're speaking about a common analogy that's often used, and what's used in the so-called water analogy would be that, the same substance or essence of water can appear as ice and liquid and vapor.
Right.
And that's certainly a helpful way of trying to imagine how the same something that is essentially the same can nevertheless be or appear or be encountered in different forms. Another example that is often used would be fire, because you have fire, light, and heat all in the same moment. And not what's helpful to think through in the analogy using fire is that if you could imagine a moment when God began to exist, which you can't, but if you could, there would be fire, light, and heat at the same moment instantaneously, not sequentially. So you wouldn't have first the Father, fire, then the Son, light, and then heat, the Spirit. The moment you have fire, you have all three of those. And there's something concurrent about the way in which fire is in the world that helps to provide an analogy, as opposed to the water analogy, in which one could imagine the same bit of water in three different forms, but at three different times. You first have ice, and then it would become water, and then it would melt and steam away. So all of these are indeed helpful analogies to try to understand what we mean by one and three. But I think it's not so much that the doctrine is complicated, and that's what I'm trying to say in my paragraphs here. It isn't so much that with enough logic we could figure out or come up with a perfect analogy of threeness and oneness. It's that the very language itself, to say that something is even now three and one and three, in its fullness and its entirety, not merely as aspects of fire, light, and heat, or ways in which water can manifest itself, but is simultaneously those things. It isn't that if we apply enough logic, we'll be able to figure it out. The idea is that the language itself is requiring us to recognize the poverty of our human language, the poverty of language to describe God, because we're held in a persistent or continual contradiction of, is God three or one? So if I saw God, would I see three or would I see one? If I was in heaven, right? What am I going to experience, or what would that be like? So So the point is not that we can logically figure it out or that we can come up with a perfect analogy, but precisely the issue is that logic is the wrong approach for the deepest kind of experience or awareness of God. It's limited, and therefore we have to move beyond it into something else. And that something else would be ultimately, I think, love or relationality.
Mm-hmm.
Does that make sense?
Yes. Yes, thank you.
Sure, John. Does anybody want to follow up on that? Did that make sense to people? Or, as you might imagine, the practice I have planned for us is simple, but maybe not for this coming week around exploring the sense of the experience of Trinity, what that looks like for you.
Yes, thank you, Father, for that great interpretation. It really helped a lot.
Thanks, Patty. Oh, Stefan, hi. Can I just ask you to unmute? There you go.
Oh yeah, well done. Yes, thank you very much. It was. I haven't read your book. I must get it. Yeah, I was thinking during this thing in the Eastern mysticism of the non-dual, not two, and I was thinking, how does the one and the three, but the not two, does that make any connection? The God is not two.
Yes, actually, I'm trying to remember where I was reading about this, but this sort of Christian approach to that not two-ness with regard to this notion of, Trinitarian theology is in a sense, instead of reducing two to one or merging two into one, the way that you overcome duality or not two-ness in Trinitarian language is to add a third, right? And what that does is establishes relationality as the very essence of God's nature. So that in other words, it was put, I think, in the book called God for Us. It was put this way, that God is, that what the doctrine of the Trinity is attempting to grasp at is the idea that God is relational without multiplicity of being. So normally when we think of relationality, it's difficult for us to get beyond the notion of being in relationship, right, to something. So I'm in relationship to you, I'm a mother in relationship to her child. But within the Trinity, we have relationship without multiplicity of being. Relationship being the threeness without multiplicity of being is the insistence on the oneness. Meaning that within the Godhead, as it were, unity is expressed only as unity in relationship, only as so we don't end up in Christianity with a God who is so profoundly unique and transcendent, I guess, maybe not so much unique, but transcendent, that there is an incapacity to be in relationship because there's no way to bridge our finiteness with the infinity of God. And Trinity, in a sense, is God in ecstasy, meaning literally to leap outside of God's self. And so this the beautiful notion of perichoresis, or to dance around, you hear the word choreograph in that, right? So this idea of each member of the Trinity indwelling, interpenetrating one another, and that the incarnation, in a sense, wraps us up in that divine dance, or brings us into that perichoretic relational sort of ever emptying into one another sort of dynamism of divine relationship. And so God can never really be conceived as this inaccessible transcendence, but rather God's transcendence spills out and brings us into it, because otherwise we would have no way of personally of attaining it in our finitude. So the beautiful notion of the duality overcome by adding rather than removing is, I think, beautiful in terms of the Christian contribution to that.
Sometimes people say that in love there's the one who loves, there's the one who is loved, and then there's the love.
That's
which
right.
is itself like another person. In a family, it's like you get a parents and a child, and that's a physical manifestation. But even if there's no child, the love which is between two people is itself another person in the relationship. It has a being in itself. So you can, I don't know, but some people say that. The lover and the beloved, and then the love that is between them.
Yes, I think that's a beautiful analogy. I think it was even Karl Rahner who said that the, and I don't know if, to be honest with you, I'm not sure if he was citing something more ancient in the tradition, or if it was his way of articulating that the Holy Spirit is the love between the Father and the Son. And I think that resonates with your analogy there, that that love becomes its own thing as it's exchanged, and binds and unites, and yet is inseparable from lover and beloved. I've often in my sermons talked about the Trinity as love loving love, as a way of thinking through maybe that same idea.
Yes.
It's beautiful. And I think I just got a message. Let me just see. That's from Cindy. Yes. Cindy, beautiful comment, just talking about the non-duality of Christ as perfect union between the created and the uncreated, or what we would think of as human and divine. Absolutely. That's right.
Father Vincent, one of talks by Richard Rohr, he explores this concept of the Trinity, and you touch on that actually when he mentions that the Trinity is but the divine dance in which each one of the well, I failed to use the correct word in here, not components, but each one of the persons of the Trinity actually it's like in the musical chairs where the three of them keep changing positions, but they intermingle into one another. So it's difficult to identify, because this is a dynamic process. It's nothing that we can actually, well, there's God the Father, there goes the Son, there's the God the Spirit or pneuma, but they all oscillate around that divine circle that cannot even be defined with boundaries, the perichoresis. So I find after doing a full unit on Trinity, and I came out to none wiser. That was something that really helped me to understand with the heart, not with the head, what Trinity comes to be. Very difficult topic.
Yes, it's one of my favorite theological subjects because it's just so beautiful and because it's mysterious. And I want to just thank you for the way of speaking about the dynamism. One of the ways I heard a professor when I was in Leuven talk about it was that anything you can say about the Father, you can say about the Son. And anything you can say about the Son, you can say about the Spirit. And anything you say about the Spirit, you can say about the Father, except the Father is not the Son, and the Son is not the Spirit, and the Spirit is not the Father. It's sort of like this. So it's sort of this logical or illogical game that sort of goes around. But I think what one of the beautiful aspects as we reflect on this is indeed what I tried to raise in these paragraphs, that the very point of all of it is not that we will find that logical way of talking about it. But as you pointed to, Dwight, it really brings us not to a place of being illogical, but I think of pushing us to a place of being metalogical. We recognize the idea that logic, there's a difference between being against logic, and there's another thing of realizing logic just isn't the method or the tool that will get us to that place. So it transcends logic in that sense. And the reality is, any good theological tradition, not just the Christian tradition, would make the ultimate case that God is mystery. So this is just the Christian way of doing that. It's not that we are are uniquely making this claim about God. It's just we make a unique claim around Trinity because of the sort of mysterious understanding or encounter with Christ, in which we see very early on within the Christian tradition monikers or titles being attributed to Jesus that until then had only been and could only be attributed to God. And so we begin to recognize that there's something shifting here in the way where we're talking about what we would otherwise assume was a human-to-human encounter, and is actually beginning to evoke a sense of, are we talking here about what eventually gets sort of nailed down as incarnation? Right? The experience of God in this fullest sense. But none of it is meant to be figured out. It's meant to leave us like a koan would say in the Zen tradition, to realize that, the mind is just the wrong tool here. It's just never going to be good enough to arrive at a logical model, but rather an invitation into a mystery of relationality with the divine. That's really what I think the doctrine is after. And I think, too, the implications to say then that we are created in the image of God, for the Christian, that can only mean we are created in the image of the triune God, which means that in our own innate desire to be relational, to love, to be social, to be communal, that this is the very mark of the Trinitarian God on the human person. When we desire intimacy and desire love, and desire to, and when our hearts are restless, as it were, until we find and move into that deep richness of relationship, that is the impulse and the mark of the relationality of a triune God within us. I think that in a sense compels us to seek that. That's just who we are as children of a triune God.
That's a good point. I never thought about that. Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome, Dwight. I want to just call up a minute, and feel free to interrupt me if questions are coming up. Although I'm going to call up the paragraphs again, so I won't be able to see you raising your hand. So just take off your mute and chime in, okay, if you have something to say in a moment. I'm just going to call this up because I do want to return us to something I wrote here to try to just in a very concise way make the point. Let me see where it was. Yeah. So here, I guess this is really getting to the essence of it. What I've highlighted here. So God cannot logically be both three and one in a numerical sense. The attributions are mutually exclusive, forcing us to recognize the profound failure of human language to grasp the divine. And that's what I want you to focus on. There is a failure, an incapacity to grasp in any kind of logical sense the divine. And so what's left but mystery, right? So thus the doctrine of the Trinity is at once an attempt to model the uniquely Christian experience of God as one that is essentially relational, even as it forces us to recognize that no language is adequate of God. And this is what Dennis Turner, who you saw up here, refers to as that self-subverting language, language that self-contradicts, or language that collapses in on itself. And we'll see that in the world of Christian mysticism, self-subverting language is really the heart and core of where we end up. So, for example, it isn't just language about the Trinity that is self-subverting, 3 and 1 at the same time. But when we think of, for example, something we talked about some weeks ago, that within the sort of framework of mystical theology, you have something by which we might affirm something of God and then have to deny that very thing. And this is called cataphaticism. We affirm something, and then apophaticism, we deny something. And so we might say God is love, but then you realize, well, God is so far above love that you have to actually deny that God is love, because otherwise you actually have created an idol. You actually think that God is love in a way that you can actually imagine, rather than so far above that it's beyond that. And so you end up having to negate the very thing you affirm. And then the next thing somebody might say is, well, then God is not love, because now you have to negate the negation, and so on. And so what you end up with is a very circular, ever negating way of speaking, because you realize that everything you're saying is ultimately inadequate. Another example would be God is light. Well, no, God is dark. And then you come to a self-subverting description, which would say God is darkling light, or luminous darkness, which is like saying 3 and 1 or Trinitarian. What does it mean to have dark light? It's sort of an illogical contradiction. But it's in those moments that we come to recognize that we're not, in fact, in the world of logic. We're in the world of metalogic. And we're in the world of the heart, and not the prison of the mind, as some of the mystics would say, which is why this notion in the mystical tradition, I believe from Nicholas Okusa, says you have to learn to become ignorant. He calls it docta ignorantia, or learned ignorance. You have to unknow. You have to learn to unknow, to strip away everything you thought you knew and unknow it, like as in the cloud of unknowing. You have to unknow it in order to get beyond the limitations of logic. And that's in this whole paragraph and the preceding one, what I'm trying to say, particularly about the mystery of the Trinity. It's really captured in a much broader conversation of how we articulate the Christian tradition as such. Pause that there.
Father, this brings to mind Thomas Aquinas's saying at the end of his life, when he had a profound experience of God. And he essentially said that, everything I've written is like straw in the wind.
That's right.
And he became silent.
Right.
Because he knew that nothing ever could put into words what he had experienced.
That's right. And the legend has it, he, at that time, when he said everything I've written is all straw, he told his students to burn all of his works. And the joke is, many seminarians wish they had listened to him. But yes, that's indeed the case. And this is after a lifetime of such prolific writing, and that brings the reality of unknowing to really its pinnacle, because it isn't that Aquinas began as a young man and decided to spend his life in silence. So in other words, the silence of Aquinas is not a chosen silence. It's a silence that he is reduced to after a lifetime of trying to say everything he could. And there's a valuable lesson in the relationship then between speaking and silence, that we shouldn't try to refrain from naming God and speaking about God in every possible way we can through song and art and music and literature and theology and commentaries. In fact, we need to try to speak as clearly as we can and as prolifically as we can, always knowing that in the end, we will then be exhausted into a place of silence, rather than simply choose one before we even try. That's a very different experience. Right? And there are sometimes, this is why in the comments I make today, it isn't so much that we should think of some things are more right than others, but rather when we speak about God, some ways of speaking are simply less wrong than others. Again, that shifts the perspective on our incapacity to actually understand, but puts the effort on trying, because sometimes there are pastoral situations or reasons in life where people do need to hear a word from us, and there are better ways of saying it than not, perhaps. Even Augustine, who, as you know, wrote tomes, also said, in the end, we know God is unknowable. So these are some of our greatest theologians in Christian history, and both arrive at that conclusion, despite the fact that they had written so very much, in fact. So, okay, I want to thank you for that. I see that we're nearing end. Samara, did you want to offer something? Yeah, please do.
Yes, it's just a sharing. As I was listening to you, what came to me is that the Trinity are three who speak the same word, so one word. So God is the verb that the Spirit blows in the word Jesus. And we are created image to speak the likeness word, the holy word. Thank you, because your sharing enlightened this. Thank you.
Oh, thank you, Samara. That's beautifully said, yes. And there's a beautiful tradition that talks about God the Father as the one who speaks, and what he speaks is the word. And as we know, whenever we're speaking, that word is carried on the breath, and that is the breath of the Spirit. So what you just shared resonates deeply with that idea, which I think is very beautiful. Thank you. Very nice. I know that we're just nearing 8 o'clock, and I know some of you will have to go. So 8 o'clock my time, sorry. That's very California centric for me to say that. Let me call up our practice for this week for those of you who will have to go, and then we could have a discussion. Okay. Okay, so for the contemplative practice, in what or whom or when do you experience the mystery of the Trinity come to expression? So I don't want you to think about the Trinity. It's not going to get you anywhere. I want to know how you experience that mystery. So in what or whom or when, and that could be, you're welcome to respond to that as a general sense in the course of my lifetime, or in general, this is in whom or what or when I experience the mystery of Trinity, or in the week ahead, here's a moment when that came to expression for me, or when I experienced something that was uniquely Trinitarian, or that I could describe or think through in Trinitarian ways. Okay, which that would help us do that. Okay. All righty. Well, we're at 8 o'clock, and I know some of you will have to get on with your days and nights. But as some of you know, we do stay around another 10, 15 minutes or so just to talk about last week's practice. So I'll do that. Bye, Cindy. Are you waving goodbye? All right. You have a good day now. All right. Benum Christinet. Bye, guys.
Thank you, Father Vincent.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Mark.
I hadn't done last week's practice, so I don't think I can add anything, but I'll join next week.
Wonderful. Okay.
I will have done this week's.
Okay, so take good care now.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Okay, so anybody would like to share their practice? And if it helps, I can call that up for a moment here to get us back on track. So last week's was find time to sit with the stillness of the big book of scripture, which was our focus. And when you are ready, write a verse that expresses what you read. So find time to sit with the stillness of the big book of scripture, of course, which we will refer to as creation, as nature itself. And when you are ready, write a verse that expresses what you read. So I'm not sure if you all had an opportunity to write a verse, but I would love to hear them. I know some of you have. Yeah, Dwight.
Well, actually, I've been wrestling between the homework and also with Lent activity. One that hasn't left me yet is the concept of the scapegoating. Anyway, that's another story. So the two of them kept stirring my head. But even so, I managed to put this looking at nature and looking at the creation in general. I wrote this, it's more like a prayer really. Oh God, ineffable ultimate reality. When I observe the myriad of living forms, I see your power as the dynamic force revealed in all that exists. May I always be in awe when contemplating your creation.
It's beautiful. And it sounds, Dwight, a lot like what you were even talking about in your description of that dynamic sense of Trinity right there.
Yes, correct.
Yeah, that's beautiful. Beautifully said. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Very nice. Hey, Robin. You're going to unmute at the bottom left. Cannot hear. So if you go to the bottom left of your screen, you'll see what looks like a little camera and a microphone. And if you click off the red slash in front of them, you...
Actually, Robin is unmuted, but for some reason, her microphone is not cooperating.
Maybe the volume of her computer is low.
Oh, okay. That's an idea. Do you need to turn up your volume, Robin? Oh, there you go. We can hear it now. We can hear you. A little bit. Yep.
I listen to you and you read it?
Sure. You want to send it to me?
Yeah.
Okay. So we'll give Robin a chance to send it to me because she's coming in very choppy there. And then, yeah. So Linda.
Yeah, I wrote a little verse. I'm in Florida now, and we're on the Gulf Coast side. And the other evening, my husband, my cousin, and I went to the beach and watched the sunset. And as you know, it looks like the sun really goes down and sets, as the sunrise looks like the sun really comes up. So I wrote a verse about that. The sun rises and sets, illusion insisted. Progress proved its fallacy. Certainty stands firm until truth discovers a grander perspective.
Very nice.
Thank you.
Very nice. Yeah, we should be calling sunrise and sunset earth turn or something like that.
Yes.
Yeah. That's right. Very
Earth
nice.
Spin.
Beautiful. That's a beautiful way of speaking about how illusion and truth one comes to push through the other, despite perception. Beautifully done. Thank you. Thank you so much. And I did get Robin's poem or reflection, so I'll read that for you. The breath of love early this morning, God exhaled a slow, sweet breath, and dawn awoke my earth, covered with a soft, dewy comforter. The trees in the distance peered as shadows, and the world was superimposed with a pale grayness and a tint of pink. I walk the wetlands at dawn, and this verse came to me. Beautiful, Robin. Nicely done, thank you. And it helps to be able to picture where you are. Knowing it, yes, thank you.
Her writing really painted a picture for me.
Yeah, beautifully. All of yours have, yeah, it's beautiful. Very impressive. Hey, Joanne.
Two things that I can share. One is I was walking through the park and there's a lake in my park, and it was a cold morning, so there was mist coming off the water. And the thought that came to my mind then was, even the water has to give itself away. As the mist was raising up and it was transforming itself. So that really spoke to me. And then one day I was out walking, and I was just deep in thought, and I got interrupted by the sound of what sounded like a million ducks. I stopped in my tracks and I searched the sky for the source. I had to wait a few minutes, but soon hundreds of ducks entered the scene in perfect formation. I was in awe. I stood and watched as they kept coming and coming and passing, and finally, like caboose, passed through the sky, leaving it empty and quiet. And I had been pondering who was my community. And when I saw this, I said, even the ducks in the sky have a community, God. So where is mine? Are you telling me that this is my community, all of the nature that is surrounding me? Certainly, I am a part of the whole universe. Yes, indeed, part of this vast community. But can you bring it closer to home for me? And he said, soon I saw 3 ducks going in the wrong direction, or at least the opposite direction as the fleet that just passed. A moment later, they returned, heading now in the right direction, but with 3 more, apparently wayward ducks in tow. Redirecting them and staying by their side, the initial 3 manifesting the shepherd, finding his lost sheep and bringing them home. It was quiet again, standing in awe of what God had just revealed to me. Then a lone duck, again lost and heading opposite from his people. He flies beyond my sight. My heart has compassion for this lone one. I felt connected. But moments later, my heart was lifted as I witnessed him heading in the right direction with 2 ducks beside him and redirecting him homeward. No one gets left behind. God will send a shepherd to find every lost sheep. We are never alone. We are always missed. We may have to wander a bit longer than some others, but we all find our way home, for he does not lose any. So then I just wrote, no one gets left behind. I will send a shepherd to find every lost sheep. You're never alone. You're always with. Well, I guess that's what I just said. I may allow you to, yeah. So that's what it spoke to me so profoundly, that whole duck scenario of just God gathering us all.
So Joanne, thank you for that. Just on a very practical note, your microphone makes you sound like a very cool alien. I just want to put that out there. So you might want to just when you come back and you hear this particular one, see if there's a way you might adjust that. But I was able to discern what you were saying. What I find beautiful about your story, in terms of the specific assignment that I was sort of asking in terms of practice, is the way in which, the idea is that the big book and the little book are written by the same author and ultimately don't contradict. And in a sense, the big book experience that you relayed with the ducks and the one that goes to search is the story of the lost sheep, or of the prodigal son, or of the lost coin. So basically it's a creation version of Luke 15. And that is such a beautiful sort of example of what it means to understand that we can lean through the truths expressed and revealed in the big book of creation, those deep truths that also we find in the little book, and how the author behind both teaches those deep truths to us in such beautiful ways. And in some ways then, as I think you did, you were able to read the big book and the little book sort of in relationship with one another. And here you arrive at this beautiful sort of consistent truth around that, which is lovely. So thank you for that. Yeah, thank you.
Computer, maybe that's why the microphone is weird, so I'll have to check that out.
Possible, yeah. By the way, very quickly, I did look very quickly. It is his sermon 86. The book is correct. So I don't know what version you have of sermons, but there's something incorrect there, I believe.
Okay, all right, I'll check it out. Thanks.
Okay, no problem. Yeah, hi, Catherine.
Hi. This week I went up to one of my favorite places. We're very fortunate that about 45 minutes from our house there is a beautiful valley with a stream running through and a waterfall. And that waterfall has become for me very much of a sacred space. So that's where I went to write my my single verse, and it turned out to be more of a psalm. So this is what came up for me. I seek you, O Lord, in the joy of the rushing creek's cheerful song, in the exuberance of the plunging waterfall's descent to meet the pond below, in the warmth of the afternoon sun's last rays, in the cool of the damp soil's fertile decay. I seek you in the promise of delicate catkins bringing new life, in the tenderness of new ferns unrolling their fronds, in the courage of a tiny spider dangling before my eyes, from what I know not, in the confidence of a wee small ant traveling the length of my thumb, in the ecstasy of airborne gnats performing their mating dance. I seek you in the silence of my listening heart. Wherever I seek you, O Lord, I find you are already there, awaiting me.
It's beautiful. We should all edit these and publish them and get rich. They're absolutely beautiful, Catherine. Yeah, it's and again, I know that space that you're talking about, that waterfall, and that helps, of course, to conjure such gorgeous images. I know what you mean. It's very beautiful. Thank you for that. You know, one of the things that's surfacing really in all of the reflections and sharings that you have is the beauty that arises in me of knowing the intentionality with which each of you in this past week has approached these experiences, and to think, wow, all this beautiful intentionality going on and coming to such beautiful expression in these reflections and poems. So it's very heartening, very heartening. Thank you all. Yes, Samara.
Well, I did the Lectio Divina of the last sentence of Isaiah 58. That was the first lecture from yesterday. That says, then you shall call the Lord, and he will say, here I am. So I took this sentence, here I am. And then I was invited to prepare a backpack to the journey to the desert during this Lent. And then I realized that I have already arrived with a very heavy, useless backpack. So I prepared it by taking off my memories, images, voices, belongings, persons. And then I put into my bag only the verb. Only the verb is enough. And by taking the verb on my back, and the verb is God, so when I shall call the beloved, the Lord will whisper on my ear, here I am. Thank you.
Beautiful. Thank you. What a great image of emptying your backpack. I love it. It is true, huh? How much weight we carry inside, not just in materialism, but how much emotional baggage we carry and how much historical baggage and relational baggage. That's beautiful. Robert, is there any way that we could, for those who wanted to, post these?
Yes, we could actually post them on Facebook, which would be beautiful.
Yeah, I would want to encourage those of you who feel, comfortable doing that to, would the method be just to send them to you, Robert, and then you'd be able to post them?
Yes, I could send them to me, or anyone who is a member of their Facebook page could actually post it. But if you wish, you could send it to me, and I could put them all, compile them into one document.
That would be really nice.
I would love to do that.
And maybe we can even just in some way put what the sort of the practice request was to give it, so that may help unite what the experiences are. That would be lovely.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Robert.
And
yes,
I
thank
too
you
was
all.
moved to.
What's that?
I too was moved to write a little poem.
Oh, wonderful.
And so it is. Well, the background is that I walk to the gym. It's about 20 minutes, and it's spring, so the daffodils are blooming. So there are thousands and thousands of daffodils, but I focused on one. One caught my attention. And what has inspired to write is, oh, joy of spring, how long have I waited to enjoy your bloom? The color of the sun, the shape of a trumpet. Your beauty serenades my eyes and melts my heart.
Nice. Beautiful. It's interesting how of the thousands, your eye fell to one of them, right? It's lovely.
That I found quite interesting because it captured all of creation in this one bloom.
Well, and what's so beautiful about that, again, resonating with the notion of the big and the little book that sort of inspired this practice, is that the Desert Mothers and Fathers always said that if you want to embody the gospel, or they would use the word attain the gospel, any verse in scripture will eventually will be the doorway or the way in which you can embrace the whole thing. So you come to all of it through the practice or the attainment of any one verse. In fact, later on in the book, I'll actually explore that idea, and it would be a good time to come back to your beautiful reflection there, that through any, or as John Muir said, to pick up anything in the universe is to realize it is hitched to everything else. And so we come to the whole through any particular portal, right? Beautiful. Thank you all. By the way, Lydia, it's good to see you.
I'm not as a good writer as everyone else, and I really enjoy everyone's writing. So I just want to share this. I'm a terrible writer, by the way. So I go to this Bear Creek that's very close to my house. And, when you ask about this practice, I intentionally pay attention to nature, and it make a big difference. All the sounds just intensify for me. So what I wrote was, my senses intensified with the beauty of singing birds, the smell of fresh morning, and the oak trees, the croaking of frogs, the noise of car engines. These sounds mix in an harmonious song to manifest your immense love for us.
That's beautiful. You know, what's so beautiful about it is the way you paint the picture. You're just noticing, and you know, when you were reading that, something that suddenly occurred to me was, what would it mean to continue these practices in various ways rather than have us put them aside week to week? For example, I always, you know, my students, if I give them a quiz and they think, well, now I don't have to remember that anymore because I got the answers right on the quiz, right? So I always say, no, you're going to need that, you know, as you move on, as we build, you know, whatever it is we're doing in class. So I wonder, what would it mean for us to continue to cultivate something like what Lydia's whole perception was there of this intentionality around creation, or all the things that you've all been sharing? What does it mean to keep cultivating that sense of big book, little book, or that sense of, as we'll see in the following week, what it means to understand our relationship through a triune experience of the divine and so forth? All of these things are really just meant to coalesce around one thing: living more deeply, more intentionally, more compassionately. And they're just angles in which we're trying to get in to that kind of that reality, somewhat like the flower that Robert was talking about. It's the one, each practice that we have is like one flower in that field of thousands, but all of them are helping us to arrive at the deeper experience of that beauty. So just try to hold in mind that the real intention behind all this is that intentionality, and see how you might bring it forward week to week, and not lose sight of those, because it's beautiful what you're all sharing. Thank you.
I've been trying to decide whether what I did was did fill the assignment. I don't know whether it does or not, but I decided I'll just say it anyway. It's actually a haiku.
That's great.
The grape, I by the way, I live in a wine country, a grape growing country. The grape clings tightly, knowing neither root nor wine, the vine suffices. Is that, I don't know if it fills the assignment or not, but
of course it does. No, it's actually quite beautiful. It's that's very lovely, Joanne. Yeah, I mean, the assignment really, if we can think of it as assignment, I prefer perhaps practice, but the practice is to move more intentionally, more deeply into what's right in front of you. And what a beautiful way to craft that in such a creative way, which speaks this sort of, as a haiku does, right? This sort of slice of life that it gives you in a moment. And that's it. It's being in that present moment. The grape on the vine, and the vine suffices.
That was
I am the
beautiful,
vine, you are
John.
the branches. What's that, Linda?
I just said that was beautiful, Joan.
Thanks. I didn't know whether it was applicable, but thank you.
Very much so. Thank you. Well, I want to thank you all for sticking around for this extra period of time, and for sharing these beautiful poems. I know Robert just, I believe, sent a chat to all of us about posting them. Is that correct? Did I see that right? Yes. So
that's correct. Yes, my email address.
Okay, perfect. I see it there now. So yeah, for those of you who feel like, you know, you're willing to share them, you can do so either with your name associated or anonymously if you prefer. But it'd be nice because they really all give something quite beautiful to the practice, and would, I think, inspire a lot of people. So I would encourage you. So thank you again. I will be back in Inverness next Saturday. So I'll be hailing from Inverness a week from now. And I look forward to seeing you all again. And I hope you have a lovely week.
Thank you so much. It was awesome.
Thank you.
Thank you.